night. You know, this is the most outrageous spectacle I've ever witnessed. There's only one thing I wish. I sure gotta pee, and this ain't nowhere to go. I believe we're gonna go up the country a little bit right now.
In 1969, 500,000 people came together for one of the most unforgettable music festivals in history, Woodstock. It wasn't just about the music. It was about peace, love, wild fashion, and the kind of freedom you could feel in the air. Cameras were everywhere, but not everything made it to the magazines or news. Some moments were too raw, too real, or simply forgotten. But they happened. And now, years later, some of those powerful images are finally being seen. From muddy hugs to spontaneous dances, this is Woodstock like you've never seen before. Join us as we take a rare look back at the untold faces of a cultural revolution. Woodstock, 1969, the start of something big. In August 1969, something historic happened on a dairy farm in Bethel, New York. It was called the Woodstock Music and Art Fair. Most people just know it as Woodstock. For 3 days, from August 15th to 18th, over 460,000 people gathered to experience peace, music, and unity. The festival was first planned as a small music event, but it quickly grew into something much bigger. At first, the organizers thought only about 50,000 people would come, but word spread fast. People from all over came to be part of it. They didn't care about tickets or fences. In fact, the event became a free concert when it became clear that the setup couldn't handle the massive crowd. The original idea was to earn a profit, but the crowd was just too large to control. The fences were never finished, and the gates couldn't be closed. People poured in from all sides, turning the festival into something no one expected. The event took place 60 miles away from the actual town of Woodstock, but the name stuck, and so did the memory. Woodstock wasn't just a concert. It became a symbol of the 1960s counterculture. Peace, love, and music filled the air, even with all the chaos. People were tired of war and violence, and they wanted something different. Woodstock gave them a place to believe in peace, planning the impossible. Woodstock was the idea of 4 young men: Michael Lang, Artie Kornfeld, Joel Rosenman, and John P. Roberts. Roberts and Rosenman were businessmen from New York. Lang had some experience promoting concerts, including the Miami Pop Festival the year before. Together they started planning what they thought would be a small music festival. At first, Lang wanted to build a recording studio in the woods near Woodstock, New York, but that plan didn't go anywhere. So, the group came up with a new idea: a big music concert. They started a company called Woodstock Ventures and set up their office in Manhattan. Their office was decorated in a wild, psychedelic style that fit the times. Bright colors, crazy furniture, and a creative vibe filled the place. But the team didn't always agree. Roberts was careful with money. Lang was more relaxed. As the date got closer and the pressure grew, things got difficult. Finding a location was hard. Lang struggled, so Roberts and Rosenman had to step in and find one themselves. Even with problems behind the scenes, the project kept moving forward. They knew the risks, but they also knew the potential. Booking big-name artists wasn't easy. No one wanted to be first. That changed when Creedence Clearwater Revival signed on. They were the first major act to agree to perform, and that gave the festival credibility. After that, other artists joined in. Creedence was paid $10,000, which was a lot at the time. Their drummer later said, "Once Creedence signed, everyone else jumped in line." It was a turning point. The lineup started to grow, and so did the excitement. The crowd takes over. When the day finally arrived, things didn't go as planned. The roads were jammed. People just abandoned their cars and walked. The town of Bethel couldn't stop the crowd, and news reports of the traffic made even more people stay home. But still, hundreds of thousands arrived. They camped wherever they could. Fields, cars, even roadside ditches became places to sleep. Rain made everything worse. The field turned into mud. Sanitation and food services were poor. People had to share what they had. But somehow, despite all the problems, the crowd remained peaceful. The security team was supposed to be made up of off-duty New York City police officers, but they were told they couldn't take part because it went against moonlighting rules. That made things even more difficult. Then came a serious moment. On Sunday morning, the governor of New York, Nelson Rockefeller, thought about sending in 10,000 National Guard troops. But festival organizer John P. Roberts talked him out of it. The county even declared a state of emergency. Things were out of control, but peaceful. Somehow, the spirit of Woodstock held everything together. People looked out for one another. Strangers helped strangers. A community was born in the mud. Music played from morning to night. It didn't matter if you were wet, tired, or hungry. You were part of something big, the performances that shaped a generation. Despite the delays, 32 acts performed outdoors. Big names, rising stars, and unforgettable moments filled the stage. One of the most powerful performances came last. On Monday morning, when only 30,000 people remained, Jimi Hendrix stepped up. He had waited for hours to play, and when he finally did, many had already left. Still, his performance was electric. He played a wild version of the national anthem that is now part of history. Hendrix called his group Gypsy, Sun, and Rainbows, correcting the introduction that announced them as The Experience. He played for almost 2 hours, closing out the festival in a way no one could forget. It was loud, raw, and unforgettable, but not everyone had a good time. Creedence Clearwater Revival played at 12:30 a.m., long after their scheduled time. The crowd was asleep. John Fogerty later said, "There were 500,000 people asleep. These people were out. It was like a painting of a Dante scene, just bodies from hell, all intertwined and asleep, covered with mud. But then, one small moment made it worth it. From far away in the dark, someone lit a lighter and shouted, 'Don't worry about it, John. We're with you.' Fogerty said, 'I played the rest of the show for that guy.' That one voice in the night reminded him that even if most were asleep, someone was still listening. Chaos, loss, and the spirit of peace. With a crowd that big, things were bound to go wrong. There were 3 deaths during the festival. 2 people died from drug overdoses. One young man who was just 17 died when he was run over by a tractor while sleeping in a nearby field. It was tragic, and a reminder of how wild and unplanned everything was. Then there were also stories that babies were born at Woodstock. Some said one baby was born in a car stuck in traffic. Another was said to be born in a hospital after being flown out by helicopter. But later research couldn't confirm these stories. Still, they became part of the Woodstock legend. Several miscarriages were reported. Some said 4, others said up to 8. And during the 3 days of music and chaos, there were about 742 drug overdoses. But even with these serious issues, the crowd stayed mostly peaceful. No riots, no big fights. Just people trying to enjoy the music and each other. Max Yasgur, the man who owned the farm where the festival took place, later spoke to the crowd. He said something that people still remember. "If we join them, we can turn those adversities that are the problems of America today into a hope for a brighter and more peaceful future." His words captured the feeling of Woodstock. It wasn't perfect. It was muddy, messy, and loud. But it meant something. It stood for peace and togetherness even when things went wrong. And those 3 days left a mark on the world that still hasn't faded. For many, Woodstock wasn't just an event. It was the beginning of something bigger. And now, Woodstock is now seen as one of the most iconic music festivals in history. But if you had looked at it just a few weeks before it happened, you might have thought it was doomed. The festival that almost didn't happen. Things were falling apart. The organizers had lost their permit. They were running out of time. And they had to move the entire event to a new location just weeks before the date. Because of the rush, they couldn't prepare everything. There weren't enough toilets. There wasn't enough food. The medical help was limited. It was hot and humid. Then it rained, and the place turned into a mud pit. It sounds like a setup for disaster. And in many ways, it was. Joel McCower, who wrote Woodstock, The Oral History, even said, "It probably should have been a disaster. The fact that it came off as well as it did is a minor miracle." This wasn't the Fire Festival. This was 1969, and people were used to some level of chaos. Still, no one expected things to get this out of hand. And yet somehow it worked. That's what still amazes people today. How something that looked so unprepared became legendary. But it wasn't just the planning that made things difficult. The performers and crowd had their own wild experiences too. You see, Woodstock didn't start with a star-studded list of performers. It wasn't packed with the most popular bands of the time. According to music writer James Perrone, many of the major commercial groups of that particular time period really were not at Woodstock. Of course, some acts were big even then, like Jimi Hendrix, The Who, and Sly and the Family Stone. But many others were not widely known. That's what made it interesting. These performers weren't all famous when they came to Woodstock, but after the festival, many of them became legends. Things were messy right from the beginning. So many people showed up that the organizers gave up on checking tickets. They just opened the gates and let people in for free. Almost 500,000 people ended up there. The roads were blocked for miles. Some performers were stuck in traffic. That's how Richie Havens ended up opening the show. He wasn't supposed to, but others hadn't arrived yet. He played for 3 straight hours. And when he ran out of songs, he made one up on the spot. He called it Freedom. That moment became one of the most powerful of the whole festival. The weather was bad. The ground was wet. The stage had wires running under muddy areas. McCower described it simply. The conditions were suboptimal, to say the least. Everyone was praying that the light towers wouldn't fall. The stage wasn't well built, but somehow it stood. Not all artists had a great time. Some of them actually hated it. Bad performances and strange accidents. The Grateful Dead said their set at Woodstock was one of their worst ever. Roger Daltrey, the lead singer of The Who, said the whole thing felt like a nightmare. Daltrey wrote in his book that just getting to the stage was a struggle. First they sat in traffic for hours. Then they waited even longer backstage. And when he finally got some tea, he didn't know the water had been laced with LSD. He accidentally dosed himself before going on stage. Looking out the gloom of Woodstock, he wrote, making out the vague shape of 500,000 mud-caked people as the lights swept over them, I felt in my sleep-deprived, hallucinating state that this was my nightmare come true. He also said the monitors kept breaking. The sound was still, something magical happened. The crowd, muddy and tired, stayed peaceful. Despite the lack of food, shelter, or safety, there wasn't any major violence. People shared what little they had. Even though the situation was bad, the vibe remained calm. That's what set Woodstock apart. It wasn't perfect. In fact, it was barely holding together. But people made it work. Now let's take a look at some unseen pictures of Woodstock 1969 that weren't ever seen before. Dancing in the rain. The photo shows a young woman sitting high above the crowd on someone's shoulders, throwing double peace signs into the air. Around her, people are clapping, cheering, smiling. It's black and white, but the energy feels colorful. This image captures the mood of Woodstock like few others can, joyful, rebellious, and totally in the moment. It wasn't just about music. It was about being part of something bigger than yourself, even if you were soaked to the bone and covered in mud. Hendrix holding the world's attention. If you take a look at this image, Jimi Hendrix is on stage, guitar in hand, eyes shut, a legend mid-performance. This wasn't just any moment, it was early Monday morning, after most of the crowd had already left. Yet for those who stayed, this was magic. He played the Star-Spangled Banner in a way no one ever had before. Screeching notes, feedback, chaos. It sounded like war and peace at the same time. This image reminds us why Hendrix became the face of Woodstock. Even in exhaustion and rain, his music lit up the sky. The crowd becomes the band. In this image, festival goers are playing their own instruments, not waiting for a band, not watching the stage. They are the performance. This is what made Woodstock different. People weren't just listeners, they were participants. A field of strangers turned into a makeshift drum circle. With every beat, the line between audience and artist faded. For 3 days, everyone had rhythm. Everyone belonged. Someone had to clean up. Here, a person seen dragging bags of trash through the mud, no glamour, no stage lights, just reality. With nearly 500,000 people and no proper cleanup plan, Woodstock quickly became a mess. Food wrappers, plastic, clothes, bottles, everything littered the field. Still, even in the chaos, some stepped up to help. This photo shows us that behind the peace and love was a lot of hard work. And yes, a whole lot of trash. Mud-covered, barefoot and happy. A group of people drenched and covered in thick mud laughed together in this shot. No one seems to mind. This is Woodstock's wild side, the part that didn't care about comfort or clean clothes. The rain turned fields into slippery messes, but the crowd didn't leave. Instead, they danced in it, they lay in it, they became it. This image says it all. If you came to Woodstock worried about dirt, you missed the point. Shirts off, spirits up. In this photo, shirtless men and women lean back in the sun, eyes closed, fully relaxed. There were no dress codes at Woodstock. No one cared what you wore or didn't wear. It was about comfort and connection. This photo captures the freedom people felt. Freedom from expectations, from judgment, from the world outside. For many, Woodstock was the first time they truly felt free in their own skin. Hitchhiking to history. This image catches a group of travelers walking to the site. backpacks and all. They hadn't arrived yet, but the journey was part of the story. Cars were abandoned miles away. Roads were jammed. People walked for hours just to reach the field. This photo is a reminder. Woodstock wasn't just a festival. It was a destination, a goal, a movement, and for many, getting there was its own kind of pilgrimage. Sharing came naturally. A calm image of people sitting close, passing around food, blankets, and smiles. Photographer Elliot Landy called Woodstock proof that people can live together in a peaceful and sharing way. This photo backs that up. There were food shortages, yes, but people shared. They helped strangers. Even in the middle of a storm, the vibe stayed generous. That's what peace looked like, not just in slogans, but in action. A sea of humanity. This wide shot shows a massive crowd stretching as far as the eye can see. Just bodies and blankets and color. This wasn't a small party. It was a sea of people. And somehow, it worked. Sure, there were problems. Food, bathrooms, logistics. But there was also harmony. It's hard to imagine so many people gathered in one place today without things falling apart. But in 1969, they made it work. Faces full of wonder. Up-close portraits show smiling, dreamy, curious expressions. These were the faces of Woodstock. Some looked like they hadn't slept in days. Others were glowing. Each face in this photo tells a story of excitement, confusion, discovery. It's easy to forget that most of them were just kids. They came looking for music and found something deeper. Community, chaos, and the start of something new. Our grandparents had style. One photo shows a young couple, confident, fashionable, and full of life. The caption says it best, a reminder our grandparents were hot, and it's true. The bell-bottoms, fringe vests, beaded necklaces, all iconic now, but authentic then. This image reminds us that style isn't always about trends. Sometimes it's about attitude, and Woodstock had plenty of that. No filters, just feeling. In this shot, every single person is clearly enjoying the vibe they're in. The caption reads, "Today's influencers could never," and it's true. These moments weren't curated. They weren't posted for likes. They just were, pure and raw. This photo is a breath of fresh air in a world now filled with screens. It reminds us what it means to be fully present, lost in thought, but still alive. Here in this picture, one girl sits alone, deep in thought, staring into the distance. Her face is calm, almost meditative. Not everyone at Woodstock was dancing. Some were just there to feel, to think, to be. This photo shows the quieter side of the festival, the moments in between the music, where people sat with their thoughts and let the world wash over them. Kids were also present. For some, this may be a surprising image where someone brought their child to Woodstock. Among all the chaos, the nudity, the music, a little one was also enjoying it. It's strange, but it also makes sense. Woodstock was chaotic, yes, but it was also kind. And in that kindness, some people saw it as safe, even for children. This image shows just how wide the festival's reach was. From teenagers to toddlers, everyone wanted to be part of history. Santana in full swing. Carlos Santana, mid-performance, eyes closed, guitar blazing. The crowd is electric. This was one of the sets that launched him into the spotlight. For many, this was their first time seeing him. And he delivered. You can clearly see that this image captures the power of discovery, how one moment on stage could turn a young artist into a star. Janice Joplin's pre-show ritual. A quiet photo of Janice Joplin backstage pouring herself a drink, just moments before she'd take the stage. It's personal, raw, and deeply human. She's not posing, she's preparing. This image shows us the other side of fame, the nerves, the routine, the calm before the storm. And somehow it makes her feel even more iconic. Tents, blankets, and a whole lot of mud. This image shows the camping scene, makeshift shelters, muddy clothes hanging, people curled up on tarps. It wasn't luxury, it was survival, but it worked. These weren't just campers, they were part of something unforgettable. This photo reminds us that comfort took a back seat to community, the movie that made the memory last. The actual Woodstock Festival was witnessed by hundreds of thousands, but millions more experienced it through the movie. Warner Brothers released a documentary about the event just a few months after it happened. And for many people, that film was their first real look at Woodstock. McCower said a lot of people really lived Woodstock through the movie. It's true. The film gave Woodstock its myth. It showed the music, the chaos, the crowd, and the atmosphere. and it helped launch the careers of many performers who appeared in it. Carlos Santana's band wasn't well known before Woodstock, but after the film, they exploded in popularity. Joe Cocker became famous for the way he moved on stage and for his emotional version of "With a Little Help from My Friends." That version later became the theme song for The Wonder Years. Richie Havens' improvised song, "Freedom," became iconic, especially because it was in the movie. One unforgettable moment was when Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young performed together. It was one of their first live shows as a group. Stephen Stills said nervously to the crowd, "This is the second time we've ever played in front of people, man. We're scared schless." Despite everything that went wrong, the bad weather, poor sound, delays, accidents, people still remember Woodstock as something great, not just for the music, but for the feeling. But that feeling didn't come back the same way when they tried to recreate it. The next attempt, 30 years later, would show just how much had changed. Woodstock 1999. 3 decades later, in 1999, another Woodstock was planned. This one would take place in Rome, New York, at a former Air Force base. Organizers wanted to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the original, but things quickly went wrong. The lineup mixed old and new. Artists like Willie Nelson and Jewel shared the schedule with Korn, Rage Against the Machine, and Limp Bizkit. It was a strange mix. Some hoped for peace and nostalgia. Others came to jump, scream, and mosh. The event was poorly planned. The heat in July was brutal. The area was paved in asphalt, not grass. Water fountains barely worked. Bottled water was expensive. Festival goers were frustrated, angry, and hot. And there was another problem: security. Local officials had already considered canceling the event. Security staff were undertrained. Infrastructure was far from ready. And once the gates opened, the problems exploded. Stephen Hyden, who hosted a podcast on Woodstock 99, said, "The riot was really about violence against the festival." One festival goer told him, "We're gonna set fires, we're gonna steal pretzels, because it's gonna hurt the people we feel have been taking advantage of us." But it didn't stop at stolen snacks. Violence, fires, and the soundtrack of rage. Woodstock 99 is remembered for the music, but also for the mayhem. During Limp Bizkit's set, the crowd grew wild. Fred Durst sang "Break Stuff," and many took that literally. They tore apart equipment, broke lights, and wrecked anything nearby. Some blamed the music, but as Hyden said, it wasn't just the angry songs. It was about poor planning. There's a direct line from how ineffectual the security was to all these women who were either harassed or groped or in some cases raped. The reports were horrifying. Rolling Stone's Rob Sheffield wrote about men chanting at women, "Show your teeth and pick her up." Women were surrounded and pressured to flash the crowd. Some were groped, some were assaulted. One girl told a reporter, "There was no way out. It was either show 'em or you don't get out." Another festival goer told the Washington Post he witnessed a brutal scene. "There were 5 guys that were raying this girl and having with her," he said. "They were passing her back and forth." The environment was dangerous. A young man named David DeRosia collapsed during a mosh pit and died of heat stroke. And by the final day, the crowd had turned into a mob. Fires were set. Speaker towers were pulled down. Cars were flipped. ATMs were smashed. Everything burned. And as Hyden put it, that's what happened when you believed you could copy Woodstock without planning it right. John Fogerty, lead singer of Creedence Clearwater Revival, performed at the original Woodstock. He remembered flying in and seeing the massive crowd from above. "It was overwhelming," he said. "It took my breath away." But once he landed, he noticed something that didn't sit right. "I saw someone selling water," he said. "That kind of sucks. It seemed so commercial." Even then, some artists saw the cracks. Fogerty and others still called the original a high point of their lives, but they also saw the start of something else, something that would grow worse over time. By 1999, it wasn't just about music, it was about profit. That version of Woodstock charged high prices for food, water, and entry. It didn't feel like a movement, it felt like a market. Cultural critic Stephen Hyden explained it best. That festival was declared a disaster area by the government, but that's been papered over by all this mythology. And for those who saw the movie, it was easy to believe in the myth. As Andy Zack said, people took it as fact. But the facts of 1999 were very different, and they weren't easy to forget. The end of the Woodstock name. In 2019, Festival organizers wanted to bring Woodstock back for one last celebration. They called it Woodstock 50 and planned it as a tribute to the original. Some big names from 1969 like Santana, David Crosby, and Dead & Company were ready to perform. Even Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin, who didn't play the first time, agreed to be part of it. But things quickly fell apart. First, permits were submitted late. The state didn't approve them in time. Then artists started backing out. And worst of all, the festival's main sponsor pulled out completely. They said they couldn't promise safety or meet the Woodstock brand expectations. That was a big blow. No tickets had even gone on sale yet. And just 2 weeks before the event, it was officially canceled. For many, this was the final sign. The name Woodstock no longer meant what it used to. Music critic Stephen Hayden said, "Woodstock 50 to me represents the end of that brand meaning something." And producer Andy Zack summed it up with, "You fundamentally can't repeat the unrepeatable." The original Woodstock was lightning in a bottle. It was peace, chaos, and music all at once. But some things, no matter how iconic, just can't be copied. Do you think a festival like the original Woodstock could ever happen again? Or has that kind of magic moment passed us by for good? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from Hollywood's fascinating history. See you next time.